Hello, and thank you for watching this special edition of Access Asia. We're looking at COVID-19 in China. Not the tragic number of cases or deaths, but life under lockdown, the silent suffering and the political costs. In a word, what are the effects on millions of ordinary citizens, but also oppressed minorities like the Uighurs? And what, if any, will the consequences of these draconian measures be for the Chinese president? Well, many governments are under scrutiny for their response, but China had the unenviable position of being the origin of the outbreak, putting local and federal officials under pressure to take swift, decisive action in hopes of containing the rapidly spreading disease. Tens of millions of people had their movement restricted. And joining us on the set is activist Wu'er Kaixi. Thank you for coming in to France 24. I'd like to begin by asking, what was your reaction to this massive lockdown we've seen in China?
Well, humans' life is in stake, so at this point, I want to put down my position as a dissident and extend my best wishes to the Chinese regime, Chinese government, hope that they can do the right thing. Unfortunately, everything we watch, we observe from far, we know. First of all, China concealed the news from the very beginning. They have learned about this virus in December from the very beginning, and they concealed it. That's that's because they are totalitarian government. That's how they operate. That's how they do. And then the price being paid by its own people. In this case, it's spreading around the globe. So we are paying the price for Chinese trying to conceal, and then Chinese trying to stick with their narratives. That's another thing. Local officials, for instance, when they first find there's this virus, they cannot act like a Western open society, democratic countries. Like there is no response mechanism. In China, everything has to follow the narrative of the Communist Party. So local officials wouldn't dare do anything. They report to the center, and in the center, they look into the written script of every kind of narrative, and before they find a way to communicate with WHO or the rest of the world, it's already been too late. So unfortunately, the Chinese people are paying the price, and so are we. We trusted China for wrong reason.
Well, that brings us to this report. Let's take a closer look at China's response to the outbreak. Peter O'Brien reports.
Empty beds as this makeshift hospital in Wuhan wraps up its response to the coronavirus. Some patients who've recovered there are even leaving with fond memories.
It's hard to say goodbye. We've built an emotional bond between us.
I promised the medical workers that if they come to Wuhan again, I'll take them to try our local delicacies.
For others, China's all-out war on COVID-19 has damaged more than it's healed. This food stand in Beijing used to stay open from 5 a.m. till 9 p.m. every day. Now they close at 10 a.m.
It's had a really big impact on business. Our business is 1/5 of what it was before.
China has fought the virus with what's been called the largest quarantine in history. At one point in February, around half of China's population, more than 780 million people, were living under various forms of travel restriction. In Hubei, the province where the outbreak began, entire cities with tens of millions of people were sealed off, and new hospitals were built in a matter of days. Surveillance methods reached a new level of intensity. Drones equipped with loudspeakers have been used to catch outlawed public gatherings and remind people to wear masks. Hundreds of millions have had to download apps and input information about their health and recent travel. These applications use GPS and work alongside facial recognition cameras and body temperature scanners to track who's got the virus and who's at risk of having it. This is one of the centres analysing the huge heaps of data.
The government is using big data to make the right decisions fighting the epidemic. It allows us to have precise and effective information.
Citizens have been encouraged to surveil one another as well, with rewards in some provinces for reporting people who you think might be ill. Now that the number of new cases has fallen considerably in mainland China, State-run media have hailed the Communist Party's response to the virus as the best in the world. The drastic measures have, however, caused economic activity in China to drop to record lows, and critics say there are many other costs which are harder to quantify. Human Rights Watch, for example, says China hasn't respected people's rights. Authorities have detained people for supposedly spreading rumours, censored online discussions of the epidemic, and limited access to normal medical care. There's also the possibility that the outbreak never would have reached such a scale had doctors who sounded the alarm about a potential new virus as early as December not been silenced by officials, as several reports claim.
Now, once again, joining us on the set is activist Wu'er Kaixi. You can give a voice to the voiceless. You're a Uighur dissident living in exile in Taiwan. At the end of that report, we heard Human Rights Watch say that many rights are being trampled in China. Imagine the situation is far worse for oppressed minorities like Uighurs.
It has always been the case in China that the human rights is being pressed, but in this sensitive time, like there is an outbreak, and then of course the people who are in the camp, we know they gather millions of them in the camp, and then from the very beginning we have already worried that Chinese authority wants to eliminate them, not just incarcerate them, but they will eliminate them. So naturally, it will make us extremely worried. The condition in the camp, would there be an outbreak within the camp? And then the Uyghur people living in the camp, they have no resource to ask for any help.
Is there a healthcare system in these camps?
Well, provided by the Chinese regime, but controlled by them too. But again, the Chinese regime doesn't really care about the healthcare more than their narratives. And their narratives is they're extremist. And then the world has been following Chinese suit. So what are they going to do next? We don't know. That make us, Uyghur who are living abroad, extremely worried.
I'd like to speak on that note. 40 years ago, you were the second most wanted man in China, one of the student leaders of the Tiananmen protests. Is this epidemic the greatest threat to the Communist Party since 1989?
Well, Hong Kong, for example, in the last, we have been watching for the last many months. It has been a major challenge. And then the Chinese regime have, at that time, recognized Hong Kong has been the most greatest challenge since Tiananmen. And then this epidemic, would that become one? The question is really need to be addressed to the Western world, because no matter how much a challenge Chinese governments faces, they can always seem to be able to avert it into Chinese people or the global community. I worry that this challenge become another opportunity for Chinese regime to ask the world to accept its oppressive measure to its own people or to the world.
Now, critics like you might say that China doesn't care about the human cost of this outbreak, but what about the economic one? Could that change the future?
China will face some severe economic problems, let's say, at the very least. The world will too. So the world is worried that China being an economic engine to shut down. So will the world at this point become an accomplice for the Chinese government when they say we will trade human life with our economic growth so the rest of the world can stay on with this growth? So would world at that point accept China for doing more human rights abuses? I am worried. I'm extremely worried. So the continuous wrong China policy in the last 30-some years, would it continuously run into an even deeper hole? That is the question, your question actually, the same question, but that question really should be direct to the rest of the world.
All right, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Wu'er Kaixi. A recent poll put the number of people suffering from anxiety in China at 42%. The fear of being infected by the virus has given way to an anxiety caused by loneliness, especially among the residents of Wuhan. Our correspondents went to find out more.
Zhang Wenying has spent 47 days stuck in her Wuhan apartment. Just like all the other residents of the city, she and her father are not allowed to leave their place. A tough situation for someone used to having an active social life.
Right now, I spend all my time online, sending text messages, doing video chats. I'm depressed, and when happy, my life is dull.
Whether it's the fear of being infected or the feeling of loneliness, the mental health of many residents has taken a hit. And this feeling is spreading to the rest of the country. A recent poll led by a group of psychologists finds that 42% of Chinese people right now are suffering from anxiety.
I'm anxious when you stay at home for long stretches, when shopping centers are shut, when you can't really do your shopping. It's not an easy situation.
I'm really bored at the moment. Thankfully, the stock markets are open again, so at least that keeps me busy.
This Shanghai psychologist has seen the concerns of people change over the course of the epidemic.
In the beginning, most of the anxiety is about unknown. People have no control of what's going to happen to them. But then by and by, we see more problems, more emotional problems stemming from people being isolated, or people feeling their work, their life, their routine being disrupted.
China is becoming increasingly anxious and sharing that feeling on social media. On Weibo, China's equivalent to Twitter, the hashtag "what to do when you're very anxious" has been used over 300 million times in the last few days.
Well, sometimes laughter really is the best medicine, at least to cure a bit of anxiety. Look at how barbers in Sichuan, China are reassuring their customers amid the outbreak. The long-distance haircut, I wouldn't dare ask for a shave. Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.
France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.